The sound of a hand meeting flesh echoed across the weapons qualification range like a gunshot. 83 pairs of eyes turned toward the small woman now sprawled on the concrete, her technician's cap tumbling away to rest against an ammunition crate. Staff Sergeant Marcus Blackwood stood over her, his palms still open, his chest heaving. 6 feet 2 inches of muscle and barely contained rage wrapped in a ranger instructor's uniform that somehow made him look smaller than he was. The morning sun caught the combat patch on his shoulder, the one he wore like a badge of honor, despite never having earned it under fire. I asked you one last time. His voice carried across the training yard, designed to humiliate, calculated to break. Give me the weapon. Maya Thornton, maintenance technician, oil-stained uniform, dark hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail, pushed herself up from the ground with movements that were too controlled, too measured. She said nothing. Just quietly retrieved her cap, dusted it off with 3 precise brushes of her palm, and placed it back on her head. The angle was perfect, the fit exact, her hands steady. Can't talk, Marcus laughed, spinning to face the crowd of rangers watching the scene unfold like spectators at an execution. See this? This is why women don't belong here. Can't even inspect a rifle properly without holding up an entire training schedule. Laughter rippled through some of the younger trainees, the kind of nervous laughter that comes from wanting to belong more than wanting to be decent. But Master Sergeant Isaac Calloway, standing in the far corner of the range with a cup of coffee going cold in his hand, didn't laugh. He narrowed his gaze, studying the way Maya stood, shoulders square, center of gravity low, hands relaxed at her sides but ready. That stance. He'd seen it before in places most soldiers never set foot. In men and women who operated in the shadows of America's wars, whose names appeared on no rosters, whose sacrifices earned no public recognition. Colonel James Aldridge emerged from the command building, his daily inspection route interrupted by the commotion. He stopped when he saw the scene before him, the small woman standing silent, the aggressive instructor looming over her, the crowd forming a circle like wolves around wounded prey. "What's going on here, Staff Sergeant?" Marcus snapped to attention, but his face remained flushed with anger. "Sir, this technician is refusing to release weapons to my unit. She's claiming there are defects. She's delaying our entire training schedule." Aldridge looked at Maya, then at the M4 carbine in her hands. For just a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, concern, something deeper than a colonel observing a simple dispute between staff members. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "Handle it, Staff Sergeant." Af. His voice was neutral, professional, giving nothing away. "Yes, sir." Marcus grinned. It wasn't a pleasant expression. Aldridge walked away, but his stride was slower than usual. And if anyone had been watching closely, they would have seen him pull out his phone the moment he rounded the corner of the building. Marcus turned back to Maya, stepping closer, using his size like a weapon. "You heard the colonel. Hand over the rifle." Maya met his eyes. Her voice when she spoke was quiet, almost clinical. "The firing pin on this weapon has asymmetric wear on the tip, approximately 0.3 millimeters of deviation. Under sustained fire, it will fracture within 100 rounds, possibly fewer. That's within acceptable tolerances," Specialist Owen Blackwell interjected. The armorer had been standing nearby, his pride wounded by the implication that he'd missed something. "I've been doing this job for 4 years. Acceptable for a training weapon. Won't see combat." Maya's expression didn't change. "Your Rangers are deploying to Syria in 6 weeks. Sergeant Blackwood mentioned it himself this morning at 07:15. This weapon will fail them when they need it most." The silence that followed was thick enough to drown in. Marcus stepped forward, his boots heavy on the concrete. "How do you know about our deployment?" "You announced it to 30 trainees at 07:15 this morning. Sound carries." "Sound carries?" Marcus mimicked her tone, his voice dripping with mockery. He turned to his audience again, playing to them like an actor on stage. "Listen to this. The cleaning lady has opinions about combat deployments now." Private Garrett Sullivan, barely 22 and desperate to prove himself to the older Rangers, laughed too loudly. "Maybe she's got a thing for guns since she can't get a man to look at her." The comment drew scattered chuckles from the younger trainees. Maya didn't react. She simply held up the M4, her small hands steady as stone, and worked the charging handle. The bolt carrier group slid free with a whisper of metal on metal. She held the firing pin up to the light. This pin will kill someone, not the enemy, one of yours. Owen's face turned crimson. But before he could respond, Captain Hugo Blackburn appeared from the administrative building drawn by the commotion. The training operations officer had the look of a man who valued smooth operations above all else, his uniform pressed to knife-edge creases, his expression professionally neutral, his eyes taking in the scene with calculated assessment. "What's the holdup, Staff Sergeant?" Marcus straightened. "Sir, this technician is refusing to release properly inspected weapons. She's overstepping her authority." Blackburn's gaze swept over Maya, dismissing her in a single glance. "You're here to maintain and distribute equipment as directed. Do your job and let the professionals handle the rest." "Yes, sir." Maya's response was automatic, her face betraying nothing. But Sergeant Bryn Kelly, who had been watching from the supply depot doorway, caught something in the set of Maya's shoulders, an attention that didn't match her submissive words. Bryn had been in the Army long enough to recognize the difference between someone who was beaten and someone who was choosing not to fight. She approached Maya as the confrontation temporarily dispersed the crowd moving toward the shooting lanes for the morning's first qualification round. "Hey," Bryn's voice was low, meant only for Maya. "You okay?" Maya looked up from the weapon she was already inspecting. "I'm fine, Sergeant Kelly. We've been over this. Call me Bryn." She leaned against the workbench, keeping her voice quiet. "You should report him. That was assault. He's got connections, friends in high places." Maya resumed her inspection, her movements never faltering. "I've seen his type before." Bryn studied her colleague's profile, the faint scar that traced along her jawline, the calluses on her hands that seemed too thick for someone who just cleaned weapons, the way her eyes constantly scanned the environment even while her hands worked with mechanical precision. "Where'd you serve?" The question hung in the air for a beat too long. "I'm just a technician," Maya said finally. "Started 3 years ago, nothing special." But Bryn had been a supply NCO for 12 years, had deployed twice to Kandahar, had lost her partner to an IED on a supply route that was supposed to be secure. She knew how to read people, how to spot the things they tried to hide, and everything about Maya Thornton screamed that nothing special was the biggest lie she'd ever heard. The morning progressed with the grinding efficiency of military routine. Trainees cycled through the qualification lanes in groups of 8, their rifle reports creating a staccato rhythm that echoed off the concrete barriers. Marcus prowled the firing line like a predator, his voice a constant bark of criticism and condescension. Maya worked in the background, invisible to most, essential to all. She cleared jammed weapons with movements so practiced they seemed unconscious, replaced worn components before anyone else noticed they needed replacing, ensured that every trainee who stepped up to the line had a functioning rifle in their hands. Her efficiency was almost choreographed, each motion flowing into the next with a precision that suggested years of training in environments where efficiency meant survival. Corporal Everett Ashford stood at lane 7, his hands trembling so badly the M4 shook in his grip. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the morning's relative cool. His breathing came in short, sharp gasps that had nothing to do with physical exertion and everything to do with memories that wouldn't stay buried. Maya noticed. She set down the rifle she was cleaning and made her way to his station, her approach so quiet he didn't hear her until she spoke. "Square your shoulders." Everett flinched, nearly dropping his weapon. "Easy." Her voice was low, meant only for him. "Keep your finger indexed along the receiver." "Good. Now take a breath, hold it, let half out." His breathing steadied almost against his will. "The target isn't the enemy." She adjusted his elbow position with a gentle touch that somehow felt more commanding than Marcus's shouting. "It's just a piece of paper. Paper can't hurt you." "How did you—" He couldn't finish the question. "I've seen that look before." She stepped back, giving him space. "You're not alone, Corporal, and it doesn't make you weak." Before he could respond, Marcus's voice cut across the range like a blade. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Maya turned to face him, her expression neutral. His sight alignment was off. "His sight alignment is my concern." Marcus stepped into her personal space, using his height to intimidate. "You touch one of my trainees again, and I'll have you scrubbing latrines for a month. Matter of fact, I think you owe Private Webb over there an apology. He's been waiting 15 minutes for his weapon because you're too busy playing instructor. Garrett Sullivan appeared at Marcus's shoulder, a smirk spreading across his face like a stain. Maybe she needs a reminder of where she belongs. He shoved a cart of empty magazines toward Maya with enough force to send it careening into her hip. She stumbled, but didn't fall. Her foot slid back in a lateral pivot, her weight redistributing with fluid grace, her balance recovering in a fraction of a second that most people would have missed. But Calloway didn't miss it. His coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. That wasn't a stumble recovery. That was a trained response. Specific, deliberate. The kind of thing they drilled into you until it became reflex, until your body moved before your conscious mind registered the threat. He'd seen that exact movement in one place, Coronado, the place where they made seals. Oops, Garrett laughed, not even bothering to pretend it was an accident. Maya said nothing. She simply righted the cart and began organizing the scattered magazines with methodical precision, each one placed exactly where it belonged. Her movements economical and purposeful. Across the training yard, Lieutenant Blair Whitmore was conducting medical checks on the personnel rotating through the evaluation. The medical officer had sharp eyes and sharper instincts, honed by deployments to places where recognizing injuries quickly could mean the difference between life and death. When Maya passed her station to retrieve a replacement barrel, something caught Blair's attention. The technician's sleeve had ridden up, exposing her forearm. Scars, not the neat surgical kind from medical procedures or the random marks from accidents. These were rough patterned, the distinctive marks left by high-velocity shrapnel embedding itself in flesh and then being extracted under field conditions. Blair had seen enough combat injuries during her deployment to Kandahar to recognize them instantly. Those weren't maintenance accidents. Those were war wounds. She made a mental note to pull Maya's medical records when she got back to her office. Something about this woman didn't add up. The morning's first real crisis came at 11:47. A trainee at Lane 3, barely 19 and green as grass, had somehow managed to load a round while his weapon was pointed away from the range. The discharge was deafening, the bullet punching through the ceiling of the covered firing station and sending chunks of concrete raining down like hail. Panic rippled through the trainees. Instructors shouted contradictory orders. The young soldier stood frozen, a weapon still in his trembling hands, the barrel sweeping dangerously across the crowded range as he tried to process what had just happened. Maya moved. She covered the 15 feet between her station and Lane 3 in under 2 seconds. Her hand closed over the rifle's barrel, pushing it toward the ground with controlled force while her other hand found the magazine release. The magazine dropped. Her palm slapped the bolt catch, locking the action open. She cleared the chamber by touch alone, her eyes never leaving the terrified trainee's face. "You're okay." Her voice was calm, steady, the eye of the storm. "Weapons safe. Everyone's safe. Breathe." The whole sequence had taken less than 5 seconds. Silence fell over the range like a physical weight. Calloway set down his coffee cup very carefully. Beside him, Command Sergeant Major Elijah Warren had gone very still. "Isaac," Warren's voice was barely above a whisper. "Did you see that?" "I saw it. That wasn't basic training. That wasn't even advanced training." "I know. That was operator-level response time, instinct, muscle memory." Warren turned to look at the small woman now helping the shaken trainee sit down on a nearby bench, speaking to him in low, reassuring tones. "Who the hell is she?" Calloway had no answer, but he intended to find out. Marcus Blackwood, however, saw only an opportunity to reassert dominance. He stormed across the range, his face purple with rage. "Who gave you permission to touch that trainee?" His voice carried across the silent range. "Who gave you permission to handle a weapon malfunction? You're a technician. You maintain equipment. That's all you are." Maya straightened to face him. The weapon was pointed at 34 people, including 3 officers and the base commander. For the first time, Marcus registered that Colonel Aldridge had been watching from the observation platform. The colonel's face was unreadable, but his presence added weight to the moment that even Marcus couldn't ignore. "I don't care if it was pointed at the president." Marcus's voice dropped to a dangerous hiss. "You do not step outside your lane, ever. Am I clear?" "Well, crystal clear, Staff Sergeant." The words were compliant. The tone was not, and everyone within earshot heard the difference. Marcus opened his mouth to say more, but Aldridge's voice cut across the range. "Staff Sergeant Blackwood, my office, now." Marcus's face went pale. He snapped a salute and marched away, his swagger notably absent. Aldridge watched him go, then turned his gaze to Maya. Their eyes met for just a moment. Something passed between them, an acknowledgement, a warning, a shared understanding of things that couldn't be spoken aloud. Then he was gone. Bryn appeared at Maya's side. That was incredible. I just reacted. That wasn't just reacting. Bryn kept her voice low. I've been in the army 2 years. I've never seen anyone move that fast. Training helps. What kind of training teaches you to disarm a panicked soldier in under a second? Maya's hands never stopped moving, checking the next weapon in the rack, but her eyes met Bryn's for a brief moment. The kind that keeps you alive when everything goes wrong. Before Bryn could press further, Owen Blackwell's voice carried across the yard. He stood near Marcus, who had returned from his brief meeting with Aldridge, looking even more furious than before. All right, listen up. Marcus's voice boomed across the training yard. Specialist Blackwell here says our cleaning lady thinks she knows more about weapons than our certified armorer. So let's settle this. Disassembly competition. Blackwell versus the janitor. Loser admits they don't know what they were talking about. Murmurs rippled through the assembled personnel. Even the trainees could smell blood in the water. Owen stepped forward, cracking his knuckles with theatrical confidence. I've been doing this for 4 years. Hold expert ratings in 3 weapon platforms. Let's see what cleaning bathrooms teaches you. Maya didn't move from her station. I have work to do. These weapons need to be ready for the afternoon qualification. Work can wait. Marcus stepped closer, using his size to intimidate. This is about respect, about knowing your place. Unless you want me to tell Colonel Aldridge that you're refusing a direct order. It wasn't a direct order, and everyone knew it. But the power dynamic was clear. The crowd had formed. The challenge had been issued. And in the hierarchical world of military culture, backing down now would mean surrender. Maya set down her tools. Fine. A space was cleared in the center of the training yard. 2 M4 carbines were placed on a table identical in every way. Owen took his position with the swagger of a man who had already won. Maya stood opposite, her expression blank as unmarked paper. Standard disassembly and reassembly, Marcus announced, playing master of ceremonies. First one to present a function-checked weapon wins. Ready? Owen nodded, rolling his shoulders like a boxer preparing for a fight. Maya said nothing. Go. Owen's hands moved with practiced efficiency. The movements of a man who had performed this task thousands of times. Pins out, bolt carrier group free, trigger assembly separated. His fingers flew across the components with the confidence of muscle memory, each piece coming apart and going back together in a sequence burned into his neural pathways. 47 seconds. He slapped the charging handle, pointed the weapon at the ground, pulled the trigger. Click. Function check complete. Done. He looked up, triumph blazing in his eyes. Then he saw where everyone else was looking. Maya stood motionless, her weapon already reassembled, already function checked, resting on the table in front of her. Her eyes were closed. Her breathing was slow and even. Her hands rested at her sides. Time, someone in the crowd asked. Calloway checked his watch, though he'd been counting in his head from the moment Marcus had said go. 12 seconds. The silence was absolute. That's impossible, Owen breathed. No one can. I've seen instructors who can't. She didn't even look, Specialist Harlow Pierce whispered to the trainee beside her. She did the whole thing with her eyes closed. Marcus's face had gone a dangerous shade of red. Lucky, that's all that was. Some kind of trick. Warrant Officer Jasper Mitchell pushed through the crowd. The helicopter pilot had been observing the exercises, waiting for his turn to brief the trainees on aerial insertion procedures. But now his eyes were locked on Maya with an intensity that made nearby soldiers step aside. What's your call sign? The question hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Maya met his gaze. I'm just a maintenance technician, sir. I've flown extract missions for Tier 1 operators for 6 years. Mitchell stepped closer, his voice dropping. I know what Bud's graduates look like when they handle weapons. What is your call sign? I don't have one. The lie was smooth, practiced, utterly unconvincing. Calloway pulled Warren aside, speaking in urgent whispers. That disassembly time. That level of proficiency. There's only one place that produces operators like that. You think she's a SEAL? I think she's something, and I think whatever it is, it's classified above our pay grade. Warren looked across the yard to where Colonel Aldridge stood watching from the command building window, his face betraying nothing. He knows. Look at him. He knows exactly who she is. Then why isn't he saying anything? That, Warren said slowly, is the interesting question. Marcus wasn't finished. The humiliation of watching a cleaning lady outperform his hand-picked armorer demanded retribution. He snatched an M9 Beretta from the nearest rack, ejected the magazine, cleared the chamber with unnecessary force. Anybody can play with parts. Let's see if you can actually shoot. He thrust the weapon toward Maya. Firing range, 50 yards, standard qualification course. Staff Sergeant, Captain Blackburn began, but Marcus cut him off. What? She's already proven she thinks she's better than everyone. Let's give her a chance to prove it, unless she wants to admit she's just a parts monkey who got lucky. Maya looked at the Beretta in his outstretched hand. I'm not qualified for weapons discharge on this facility. I'll qualify you. Marcus shoved the weapon into her hands. Right now, move. The crowd followed, sensing drama. Even personnel from other units drifted over, drawn by the promise of spectacle. By the time they reached the pistol range, nearly 60 people had gathered. Marcus loaded a fresh magazine, handed it to Maya. 15 rounds, 50 yards. Let's see what you've got. Maya approached the firing line with measured steps. She loaded the magazine with movements that were almost mechanical in their precision. Chambered around, raised the weapon in a textbook Weaver stance. But something was wrong. Her right hand trembled slightly. A barely perceptible vibration that anyone looking closely could see. What's the matter? Garrett Sullivan called out. Scared of a little bang? Maya adjusted her grip, steadied her breathing, and fired. The first round hit 6 inches left of the target. The second went high. By the fifth shot, her grouping was scattered across a 2-foot radius, not a single round touching center mass. Laughter erupted from the crowd. This is priceless, Owen crowed. Fastest disassembly I've ever seen, and she can't hit the broadside of a building. Technician accuracy, Marcus smirked. All theory, no practice. Maybe stick to what you know, sweetheart. Garrett was practically dancing with glee. Should have stayed in the kitchen. But Calloway wasn't laughing. His eyes had moved past the 50-yard target to the 200-yard marker at the far end of the range. 5 holes grouped so tightly they nearly touched, arranged in a perfect pentagon. Each hole precise, each angle calculated. Dear God, he breathed. Staff Sergeant Blake Ortiz followed his gaze and went pale. She wasn't missing. She was shooting a different target. Calloway did the math in his head. 200 yards, iron sights, a pistol designed for maximum accuracy at 25 yards. And she'd put 5 rounds into a pattern that Olympic shooters would struggle to match with equipment specifically designed for precision shooting. Who does that? Ortiz asked, his voice barely audible over the dying laughter. Someone who wanted us to know she could. The laughter died as others began to notice where Calloway was looking. One by one, heads turned. Murmurs replaced mockery. Understanding dawned in waves across the assembled soldiers. Marcus's smirk faltered. What? What is everyone looking at? Gunnery Sergeant Connor Byron, the Marine liaison, who had been skeptical of every SEAL rumor he'd ever heard, walked slowly to the 200-yard marker. He stared at the target for a long moment, his professional assessment making him recalculate everything he thought he knew about pistol marksmanship. Then he turned back to face the crowd. 5 rounds, 200-yard target, pentagon grouping. His voice carried across the range, heavy with something that might have been awe. I've seen Marine Scout snipers who couldn't do that with a rifle. She missed, Marcus insisted, but his voice had lost its conviction. She clearly missed. She hit exactly what she was aiming at. Calloway stepped forward, positioning himself between Marcus and Maya. The question is why she bothered to make it look like she missed at first. Maya ejected the magazine, cleared the chamber, and set the weapon down on the bench with careful precision. Her face revealed nothing. I'm done here. She turned to walk back to her station. I have work to do. Hold on. Colonel Aldridge descended from the observation platform, his stride purposeful. The crowd parted before him like water before a ship's bow. Technician Thornton, a word. Maya stopped. Sir, that was quite a demonstration. Aldridge's voice was measured careful. Where did you learn to shoot like that? Practice, sir. Lots of practice. Practice, right? Aldridge let the word hang in the air, testing its weight. He turned to look at the assembled crowd, at the shocked face and dropping jaws, at Marcus Blackwood, standing frozen in the realization that he had challenged something far beyond his understanding. Carry on, technician. As Maya walked away, Aldridge caught Calloway's eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod. Something was happening here. Something that went far beyond a simple personality conflict between an instructor and a support staff member. And whatever it was about to blow wide open. Calloway found Maya at her workstation 30 minutes later, her hands moving across a disassembled M4 with the kind of attention that suggested she was trying very hard not to think about what had just happened on the range. You know, he said quietly, leaning against the workbench, you just painted a target on your back. There was already a target there, Master Sergeant. Fair enough. He watched her work for a moment, noting the economy of her movements, the way each gesture served a purpose. I was at Coronado in 2008. Saw a lot of Bud's candidates come through. The good ones, the ones who made it, they all had something in common. A certain way of moving, of watching, of waiting. Maya didn't look up. I wouldn't know anything about that. The disassembly, the shooting, the way you took down that weapon malfunction. Calloway's voice hardened slightly. I know what I saw. I know what I'm looking at. The question is why you're hiding it. For a long moment, Maya said nothing. Then so quietly that Calloway had to lean in to hear, some missions don't end when you come home, Master Sergeant. Some people carry them forever. Before he could respond, shouting erupted from the tactical training area. Marcus had corralled his rangers for an impromptu close-quarters combat demonstration, and his choice of volunteer had not been random. You. He pointed at Maya across the yard. Get over here. Calloway tensed. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do. Maya set down her tools with careful precision. He won't stop until he's proven something, and I'm running out of ways to let him. She walked toward the CQC pit, the crowd parting around her like she carried an invisible force field. Marcus stood in the center, bouncing on the balls of his feet, his grin sharp and predatory. Since our cleaning lady thinks she's such hot stuff, let's see how she handles actual combat. He gestured expansively to the surrounding trainees. Basic defensive techniques. I'll demonstrate. She'll be my partner. Training partner was a generous term. Everyone knew what was coming. Maya stepped into the pit without hesitation. She stood in a neutral stance, hands at her sides, face empty of expression. Waiting. First technique. Marcus circled her like a shark. What to do when someone grabs you from behind. He moved fast, faster than necessary for a demonstration. His arm wrapped around Maya's throat in a chokehold that was just a little too tight, his forearm pressing against her windpipe, with pressure that had nothing to do with an instruction and everything to do with humiliation. In a real situation, you'd be dead already. His breath was hot against her ear. But let's pretend you have time to react. What would you do? Maya didn't answer, didn't struggle, just stood there, apparently helpless in his grip. Nothing. Marcus increased the pressure. Maybe you should tap out. Admit you're in over your head. Still nothing. But Calloway noticed something the others missed. Maya's breathing hadn't changed. Her heart rate, visible in the pulse at her throat, remained steady. She wasn't panicking. She wasn't even concerned. She was waiting. Fine. Marcus shifted his grip, preparing to take her to the ground in a move that would be humiliating at best, injurious at worst. Let me show everyone what happens when you freeze up in combat. Maya moved. Her elbow drove backward into his solar plexus. Not hard enough to injure, but enough to disrupt his breathing, to loosen his grip for a fraction of a second. Her hips dropped and rotated, her center of gravity shifting beneath her body becoming a fulcrum. One hand caught his wrist while the other pressed against his elbow. And suddenly Marcus was airborne, flipping over her shoulder to land flat on his back in the sand. Time elapsed 1.4 seconds. She released him immediately, stepping back to her neutral position as if nothing had happened. As if throwing a man 50 pounds heavier than her was as natural as breathing. The silence was deafening. Marcus scrambled to his feet, face crimson with rage and humiliation. Lucky throw. Let's go again. He charged at her, abandoning all pretense of instruction. His fist swung toward her face in an attack that had nothing to do with training and everything to do with wounded pride. Maya's head slipped to the side. The blow missed by millimeters, close enough that several people in the crowd gasped. Her hand caught his wrist, redirecting his momentum, using his own force against him. Suddenly, he was past her, stumbling, off balance. She didn't pursue, didn't counterattack, just returned to her neutral stance and waited. Come on. Marcus spun, his composure completely shattered. Fight back. Stop running. I'm not running, Staff Sergeant. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. I'm defending. There's a difference. He came at her again, faster this time, more desperate. A combination of strikes designed to overwhelm through sheer aggression. Maya flowed around them like water, redirecting, deflecting, never once retaliating. Each movement was precise, economical, almost beautiful in its efficiency. She wasn't fighting him. She was teaching him, showing him with every deflection, every redirect, exactly how outmatched he was. Garrett Sullivan, seeing his mentor humiliated, decided to intervene. He launched himself at Maya from behind, arm outstretched to tackle her while she was occupied with Marcus. She heard him coming. Without turning, she stepped aside at the last possible moment, catching his outstretched arm and using his own momentum to send him sprawling into the sand. Now she faced both of them. Marcus in front, Garrett scrambling up from behind. They exchanged a glance and attacked together. What happened next would be discussed in hushed whispers for months afterward. Maya dropped low, sweeping Garrett's legs out from under him, while simultaneously blocking Marcus's downward strike. She rose like a wave flowing past Garrett's falling body, her movement putting him between her and Marcus. When Marcus tried to circle around, she was already repositioning, always keeping her attackers in front of her, always maintaining control of the space. She made it look effortless, made it look like they were attacking in slow motion while she moved at normal speed. In under 10 seconds, both men were on the ground, breathing hard, unable to land a single clean hit, and Maya hadn't thrown a single offensive strike. Enough! Colonel Aldridge's voice cracked across the pit like a whip. Everyone froze. Aldridge descended into the pit, his face carved from stone. Staff Sergeant Blackwood, explain yourself. Marcus struggled to his feet, sand-coating his uniform. Sir, I was conducting a training demonstration. What I saw was an instructor attacking a civilian support staff member. Aldridge's voice dropped to a dangerous register. What I saw was a coordinated assault by two soldiers on a single unarmed woman. Sir, she defended herself without causing injury to either of you. Aldridge stepped closer, his presence filling the pit. Which is more than you deserve. He turned to Marcus, and everyone within earshot heard the finality in his voice. Report to my office, now. Private Sullivan, you are coming too. Marcus's mouth opened and closed. Finally, he managed, yes, sir. As they trudged away, Aldridge turned to Maya. Something complicated moved behind his eyes. Something that looked like concern, regret, and a decision being made in real time. Are you injured, Technician Thornton? No, sir. Good. He paused, seemed to wrestle with something. That was Krav Maga, combined with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and something else. Something I don't recognize. Maya met his gaze without flinching. I've picked up things here and there, sir. Here and there. Aldridge had nodded slowly. Of course you have. He turned and walked away, but not before Calloway saw what he'd suspected for the last hour. Aldridge knew. He'd known all along. The only question was why he'd kept silent. Maya stood alone in the center of the pit, surrounded by silent, staring soldiers. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the sand, and for a moment she looked small, vulnerable, isolated. Then Harlow Pierce stepped forward. The young specialist had been watching Maya all day with something like awe in her eyes. Now she walked to the edge of the pit and snapped to attention. That was the most incredible thing I've ever seen, ma'am. Others began to murmur agreement. The whispers spread through the crowd like ripples in water. Not mockery now. Respect. Recognition. The understanding that they had witnessed something extraordinary. Maya climbed out of the pit without ceremony and returned to her workstation. But the world had shifted. The facade was cracking. And everyone could feel it. Marcus Blackwood sat in Colonel Aldridge's office for 47 minutes. When he emerged, his face was pale and his swagger was gone. He moved with the careful steps of a man walking on broken glass, trying not to shatter what remained of his career. But he wasn't finished. Humiliation festered in him like an infected wound demanding release. He found Maya at her workstation as the afternoon shadows lengthened. Most personnel had moved to the mess hall for an early dinner. Only a handful of witnesses remained working at the far end of the range. "You think you're clever, don't you?" His voice was low venomous, making me look bad in front of everyone. Maya didn't look up from the rifle she was cleaning. "I was just defending myself, Staff Sergeant." "You were showing off, playing games." He leaned closer close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath and see the vein pulsing in his temple. "But here's the thing about games, I always win." "I'm not playing any games." "Then what are you playing at?" His hand shot out, grabbing the front of her uniform, bunching the fabric in his fist. "Who are you really? Where did you learn to fight like that? Why is your file locked behind level 5 clearance?" "Let go of me." Maya's voice was steady, but something had changed in her eyes. A hardness that hadn't been there before. "Not until you answer my questions." His grip tightened. "You've been here 3 years. 3 years of acting like you're invisible. And suddenly you're disarming panicked trainees and throwing trained rangers around like dolls. Nobody's that good. Nobody." Garrett Sullivan appeared at his shoulder, his expression eager despite the bruises forming on his face from the earlier confrontation. "Maybe she's a spy. Foreign operative planted here to gather intel." "Shut up, Garrett." But Marcus's eyes didn't leave Maya's face. "I'm going to find out what you're hiding. And when I do, I'm going to make sure everyone knows you're a fraud." He shoved her backward. Maya stumbled her hip, catching the edge of the workbench. Her shirt tore at the shoulder seam, the aged fabric giving way under the pressure. Time stopped. Because there exposed on her right shoulder was a tattoo that every soldier in the United States military would recognize instantly. A golden eagle wing spread wide, clutching a trident in one talon and a flintlock pistol in the other, surrounded by an anchor, the symbol of the Navy SEALs. Below it in stark black letters, Team 4. Garrett made a sound like a dying animal. His hand came up, slowly trembling, pointing at the tattoo as if it might disappear if he looked away. Calloway, who had been approaching with questions of his own, stopped dead in his tracks. His hand rose to his forehead in an automatic salute before his conscious mind even registered what he was seeing. "Senior Chief," the words came out as a breath, a prayer, an apology. Command Sergeant Major Warren had been walking past when the commotion began. Now he stood frozen, his face draining of color as realization dawned, like a nuclear sunrise. "Dear God." His voice was barely audible. "Operation Crimson Dawn." The name rippled through the remaining witnesses like an electric current. Crimson Dawn. The classified operation that had been whispered about in intelligence circles for 3 years. The mission that was never officially confirmed, never officially denied. The operation that had become legend among special operations communities. Colonel Aldridge emerged from his office at the sound of Warren's raised voice. He took in the scene with a single glance. Maya's torn shirt, the exposed tattoo, the stunned faces, and something shifted in his expression. Authority settled over him like a mantle, the weight of secrets he'd been carrying for 3 years finally lifting. "Senior Chief Maya Thornton." His voice carried across the training yard, commanding attention, demanding respect. "SEAL Team 4, 9 combat deployments, 47 confirmed operations." The words fell like hammer blows. "Bronze Star with Valor, 3 Purple Hearts." Aldridge continued each word another nail in Marcus Blackwood's coffin. "Operation Crimson Dawn, Mosul, Iraq, October 2019. He paused, letting the weight of history settle over the assembled soldiers. "She held a position for 9 hours under continuous enemy fire to allow 12 teammates to evacuate, with a bullet in her lung." Garrett Sullivan sat down heavily on the ground, his legs apparently unable to support him. Marcus stood frozen, his hands still extended in the moment of his final mistake, his face the color of old ash. "She eliminated 17 enemy combatants that day." Aldridge said, his voice resonating with the weight of sacrifice and heroism, "and saved 12 American lives. The only reason you haven't heard her name is because everything about that operation is classified above your clearance level." Around them, soldiers were beginning to gather. The news was spreading with the speed only military gossip could achieve. Within minutes, every person on the training complex would know. By evening, Chow, there wouldn't be a single soldier at Fort Bragg who hadn't heard the story. Specialist Harlow Pierce had tears streaming down her face. "I knew it," she whispered to the trainee beside her. "God, I knew she was something." Corporal Everett Ashford, the young soldier Maya had helped that morning on the range, was openly weeping. She knew about my PTSD. She understood because he couldn't finish. Gunnery Sergeant Connor Byron, the Marine who had been skeptical of SEAL rumors his entire career, snapped to attention and rendered a parade ground perfect salute. Senior Chief. One by one, every soldier in sight followed suit. Trainees, instructors, officers, support staff. They rose to their feet and saluted the small woman standing alone by the workbench, her torn shirt exposing the symbol of her silent sacrifice. Warrant Officer Jasper Mitchell pushed through the crowd, his face alight with recognition. Raven, your call sign is Raven. I flew extraction for your team in Mosul in October 2017. I never saw your face, but I remember your voice on the radio. You were the one who stayed on the roof to cover the extraction. Maya met his eyes. You pulled us out with 3 minutes of fuel left, Warrant Officer. I never got to thank you. You just did. The silence that followed was sacred, hallowed. The kind of silence that falls over holy ground, over memorials, over places where sacrifice has consecrated the earth. Then Captain Hugo Blackburn stepped forward, his face gray with shame. He stood at attention before Maya and rendered a salute so crisp it could cut glass. Senior Chief, I owe you an apology. His voice cracked. I failed in my duty as an officer. I prioritized convenience over justice. There is no excuse. Maya returned the salute with military precision. There's no need for apologies, Captain. But there is need for change. Yes, Senior Chief, there is. Owen Blackwell fell to his knees in the sand. I challenged a SEAL to a disassembly competition. I challenged a SEAL. He buried his face in his hands. I am the stupidest person alive. Garrett Sullivan was sitting in the sand, rocking slightly, his face blank with shock. The full weight of what he'd done, what he'd said, who he'd attacked, was crashing over him like a tidal wave. And Marcus Blackwood stood frozen. He hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. His hand was still extended where it had been when he'd grabbed Maya's shirt. The moment of his greatest mistake preserved like an insect in amber. Aldridge approached him slowly, deliberately. Staff Sergeant Blackwood. The colonel's voice was soft, but it carried across the silent yard like thunder. You just assaulted a decorated Special Operations veteran, a Bronze Star recipient, a Purple Heart holder 3 times over. Marcus's mouth moved, but no sound came out. You questioned her competence, her knowledge, her right to be here. Aldridge stepped closer. You had the gall to tell a woman who has eliminated more enemy combatants than you've ever seen to stay in her lane. A sound escaped Marcus's throat. It might have been a whimper. Consider your career over. Aldridge turned away, signaling to the military police who had materialized from the gathering crowd. MPs, please escort Staff Sergeant Blackwood to the detention facility pending court-martial proceedings. 2 military police officers stepped forward, their faces carefully neutral, as they took positions on either side of the stunned ranger. This isn't... Marcus finally found his voice. You can't... I can. Aldridge didn't turn around. And I am. Get him out of my sight. As they led him away, Marcus's legs seemed to fail him. The MPs had to support most of his weight, guiding him like a wounded man toward a vehicle that would take him to a cell and the end of everything he'd thought he was. Garrett Sullivan was next. The young soldier was still sitting in the sand when MPs approached him. Private First Class Sullivan, you are under arrest for assault on a senior NCO and conspiracy to commit. I didn't know. The words tumbled out of Garrett in a panicked rush. I didn't know who she was. I swear I didn't know. That, Maya said quietly, and everyone turned to look at her, is precisely the problem. She took a step forward, and the crowd instinctively gave her space. You treated me the way you did because you thought I was nobody, because you thought I was beneath you. Her voice was calm, measured, but it carried to every corner of the silent yard. But I was never the problem. Your behavior was the problem. And it would have been just as wrong if I actually was just a maintenance technician. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Respect shouldn't be conditional on someone's rank or status. Maya looked around at the gathered soldiers, meeting their eyes one by one. Every person on this base, every technician, every cook, every clerk, they all volunteered to serve their country. They all deserve dignity. Specialist Harlow Pierce wiped her eyes and nodded, standing a little straighter. Corporal Everett Ashford squared his shoulders. Others in the crowd shifted, straightened. carried themselves with new awareness. Aldridge stepped forward, his expression softening slightly. Senior Chief Thornton, on behalf of everyone here, I want to apologize for what you've endured. No apology necessary, Colonel. Maya's voice was steady. But there are changes that need to happen. Name them, Maya considered for a moment. Every support staff member on this base should be treated with the same respect afforded to combat personnel. There should be zero tolerance for harassment or assault regardless of the victim's role. And she paused, a ghost of a smile crossing her face. Someone might want to update the personnel database. Having a senior chief in the system as maintenance technician grade 3 is going to cause paperwork problems. Despite the tension, several people laughed. The sound was startling cathartic, breaking through the heavy atmosphere like sun through storm clouds. Aldridge nodded slowly. I'll see to it personally. And Senior Chief? He hesitated, then continued. I've been authorized to make you an offer. We're establishing a new Joint Special Operations Training Command. Inter-service cross-training. The works. We need a chief instructor who understands what it takes to forge warriors. The murmuring around them grew louder. This was more than recognition. This was opportunity. I'm still in the Wounded Warrior program, Colonel. Maya touched her right leg absently, a gesture that suddenly explained the slight limp some had noticed. I'm not sure I'm ready for that kind of responsibility. The job would wait for you. Aldridge's voice was firm. However long it takes. Before Maya could respond, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced at the screen and her expression changed, just slightly, just enough for those watching closely to notice. If you'll excuse me, Colonel, I need to take this. Aldridge nodded. Use my office. The secure line. Maya walked toward the command building and the crowd parted before her like water. Every soldier she passed came to attention. Some saluted, others simply watched with something like reverence in their eyes. Bryn Kelly was waiting by the building entrance. She didn't say anything, just opened her arms. Maya stepped into the embrace, and for the first time since the confrontation began, her composure cracked slightly. I knew, Bryn whispered. I knew there was something special about you. You were kind to me when you didn't have to be, Bryn. That means more than you know. When they separated, Bryn's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Whatever happens next, whatever you decide to do, I'm here. Maya nodded, unable to speak, and continued into the building. Aldridge's office was sparse and functional. A desk chair's American flag in the corner, photos of family on one wall, and commendations on another. The secure phone sat on the desk, its light blinking red. Maya stared at it for a long moment. She'd built a life here in anonymity, 3 years of being invisible, of healing, of learning what it meant to be normal after a lifetime of being extraordinary. Now that life was over, she picked up the phone. This is Thornton. Raven. The voice was female, heavily modulated, unrecognizable. Welcome back to the world. Who is this? A friend? An old colleague? It doesn't matter. A pause. We've been watching your progress. The Wounded Warrior program, the maintenance work, the incident today. You've been surveilling me. We've been waiting for you. There's a difference. Maya sank into Aldridge's chair, her mind racing through possibilities, calculating angles, assessing threats. What do you want? We have a mission, one that requires your specific skill set. I'm retired, medical discharge, whatever you're selling, I'm not buying. Even if it concerns Sparrow. The name hit her like a physical blow. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. The office seemed to tilt, the walls closing in, 3 years of grief and guilt and carefully maintained composure threatening to crack. Sparrow is dead, she managed finally. KIA, Mosul, I saw. You saw him fall. You assumed the worst. Everyone did. The voice softened slightly. But he's alive, Raven. We have confirmation as of 72 hours ago. He's being held at a facility near the Syria-Iraq border. Maya's hands trembled. She pressed them flat against the desk to steady them. That's impossible. We have satellite imagery, signal intercepts, human intelligence from assets on the ground. A pause. I can send you the file if you don't believe me. Why are you telling me this? Because we're mounting a recovery operation, and we want you on the team. Maya closed her eyes. Ryan Gallagher, Sparrow, her teammate, her friend, the man who had covered her retreat in Mosul, who had drawn fire while she evacuated wounded, who had fallen in a hail of bullets she'd been unable to prevent. She had carried his memory like a stone around her heart for 3 years. When briefing is at 0500, we'll send transport. I haven't agreed to anything. You haven't disagreed either. The voice took on a hint of warmth. The easy days are over, Raven. But then again, when were they ever easy for people like us? The line went dead. Maya sat motionless in the gathering darkness, the phone still pressed to her ear. Through the window, she could see the training yard where everything had changed, where her secret had been exposed, her past had been revealed, and her future had been rewritten. But now there was something else, something that transcended everything that had happened today. Sparrow was alive, and whatever it took, whoever she had to become again, she was going to bring him home. Maya stood at the window of Aldridge's office, watching the sun sink behind the distant tree line. The phone call had ended 3 minutes ago, but she hadn't moved, couldn't move. Sparrow's name echoed in her mind like a prayer, like a curse, like everything she'd tried to bury for 3 years, suddenly clawing its way back to the surface. The door opened behind her. She didn't turn. The call was about him, wasn't it? Aldridge's voice carried no surprise. About Gallagher. You knew. It wasn't a question. I received the first intelligence report 72 hours ago. Aldridge moved to stand beside her at the window. Same time they contacted you. My role was to maintain your cover until they were ready to activate you. My cover. The words tasted bitter. So the maintenance job, the Wounded Warrior program, all of it was arranged. Not arranged, facilitated. Aldridge's reflection in the glass showed a man carrying weights invisible to others. You chose to come here, Senior Chief. You chose the anonymity. All I did was make sure no one looked too closely at the woman cleaning weapons in Building 7. Maya turned to face him finally. How long have you known who I was? Since the day you arrived. Your file came across my desk with enough red flags to outfit a parade. Aldridge reached into his pocket and pulled out a challenge coin. It was worn, the edges smooth from years of handling. He held it out to her. I've been carrying this since Mosul, since I read the after-action reports, the classified ones. Maya took the coin, turned it over in her fingers. On one side, the standard military insignia. On the other, etched in letters small enough to miss if you weren't looking, a single word: Sparrow. When they told me his body was never recovered, I had this made. A memorial, something to carry until we knew for certain. Aldridge's voice was rough. Now we know. Now we know. Maya closed her fist around the coin. The question is, what happens next? That's up to you, Senior Chief, but I suspect you've already decided. He was right. She'd decided the moment that voice on the phone had spoken Sparrow's name. The moment hope had pierced through 3 years of grief like a blade finding the gap in armor. The briefing is at 0500. I need to prepare. Aldridge nodded. Transportation will pick you up at 0430, secure facility off base. The mission doesn't officially exist. They never do. Maya moved toward the door, then paused. Colonel, when this is over, if I come back, that training position you mentioned, I'll take it. When you come back, Senior Chief, not if, when. She left before he could see the doubt in her eyes. Maya's quarters were modest, a small room in the support staff building that she'd chosen specifically for its anonymity. No decorations, no personal items visible, just the bare necessities of someone passing through rather than settling in. But hidden in a compartment beneath the floorboards, sealed and climate-controlled, was everything from her previous life. She knelt and pried up the boards with practiced ease. Inside, wrapped in waterproof polymer, a modified Glock 19-3, loaded magazines, night vision optics, a tactical knife with a 7-inch blade, emergency rations, sealed in vacuum bags, and false identification documents for 3 different countries. And at the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth that had kept it pristine for 3 years, a photograph. 12 people in full tactical gear, faces covered by balaclavas, weapons at ready. Taken somewhere in the Middle East, the sand and concrete walls gave that much away. Someone had used a marker to write names above each figure. Her eyes found Sparrow immediately. Third from the left, tall even among operators, the way he stood giving away his identity before the label confirmed it. She'd been standing right next to him when this photo was taken. 4 hours before everything went wrong. 4 hours before Mosul became a graveyard for operations that would never be acknowledged. A knock at the door pulled her from the memory. It's Bryn. Can I come in? Maya wrapped the photograph carefully and returned it to the compartment before covering it with the floorboards. Come in. Bryn entered carrying 2 cups of coffee. Her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. Figured you might need this. Whatever's happening, whatever that phone call was about, I can't talk about it. I know. Bryn set 1 cup on the small table beside Maya's bunk. That's not why I'm here. I'm here because 3 years ago, when I transferred to this base, I was broken. My partner, his name was Thomas, we were on a supply convoy outside Kandahar. IED, I watched him die and couldn't do anything to stop it. She sat down heavily on the room's only chair, staring into her coffee like it held answers to questions she'd stopped asking. When I got here, I was going through the motions, existing but not living. And then I met you. This quiet technician who never talked about herself, who did her job with a precision that seemed almost obsessive, who was kind when she didn't have to be. Maya remained silent, letting Bryn find her words. You saved me without ever knowing it. Just by being present, by showing me what it looked like to keep going, even when the weight of the past was crushing. Bryn looked up, meeting Maya's eyes. So whatever you're about to do, wherever you're about to go, I want you to know that you matter. Not because of what you did in Mosul, because of who you are right here, right now. Maya felt something crack in her chest. Bryn hung. You don't have to say anything. I just needed you to hear it. Bryn stood, moved toward the door. Come back safe. We need you here. I need you here. She left before Maya could respond, before the tears threatening to fall actually did. Maya packed her go-bag in the darkness, each item placed with the muscle memory of someone who'd done this hundreds of times. The routine was meditative calming, a way to quiet the mind before violence. At 0300, unable to sleep, she slipped out of the building and made her way across the base. The darkness was absolute, the kind of black that swallowed sound and light alike. But she navigated by memory and instinct, her feet finding the path without conscious thought. She wasn't surprised to find she wasn't alone. Calloway materialized from the shadows near the motor pool, his approach so silent that anyone else would have missed it entirely. But Maya had been trained to hear what others couldn't, to see what others overlooked. Senior Chief? He fell into step beside her. Late for a walk. Could say the same, Master Sergeant. Word is you're leaving. Someone mentioned seeing transportation orders come through. Classified destination. His voice was carefully neutral. None of my business, of course. They walked in silence for a moment, 2 warriors passing in the night, their paths crossing briefly before diverging into different futures. I served with SEALs in Fallujah, 2006. Calloway's voice was quiet, almost conversational. Saw things that made me understand why they call you the quiet professionals. Saw men and women do impossible things because someone needed them done. It's the job. It's more than the job. It's a calling. He stopped, turning to face her in the darkness. Whatever you're going after, whoever you're going to save, I want you to know something. I've served with a lot of special operators in my time. SEALs, Delta Rangers, you name it. I've seen bravery and skill and dedication at the highest levels. He paused, choosing his words with care. But I've never seen anyone handle what you handled today with the grace you showed. Most people, when they're attacked, they fight back. They hurt the people hurting them. You had every right to put Blackwood and Sullivan in the hospital. Instead, you controlled them, protected them from themselves. They weren't enemies, just fools. And you showed them mercy they didn't deserve. Calloway extended his hand. Whatever happens next, wherever you go, come back safe. The Army needs people like you. Hell, the world needs people like you. She shook his hand, feeling the calluses of decades of service against her palm. Take care of them while I'm gone. Harlow Pierce, Everett Ashford, the one still learning what this life means. You have my word. They parted without further ceremony, and Maya continued her walk alone. At 0430, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled up to her position. The rear door opened, and a voice from inside called out, Raven, your ride. She climbed in without hesitation. The door closed behind her, and the vehicle accelerated into the pre-dawn darkness. 2 men sat in the front seats, driver and passenger, both in civilian clothes, but with the bearing that marked them as operators. Neither introduced themselves. Neither seemed inclined toward small talk. Maya was fine with that. She had enough to think about. The secure facility turned out to be an unremarkable building on the outskirts of Fort Bragg, the kind of structure that blended so perfectly into its surroundings that most people drove past without a second glance. Chain-link fence concrete walls, a single guard station manned by soldiers who checked credentials with unusual thoroughness. Inside the building transformed into something else entirely. State-of-the-art communications equipment lined the walls. Digital displays showed satellite imagery of terrain. Maya recognized immediately the Syria-Iraq border, her old hunting ground. A woman stood at the center of the room, her back turned, studying a tactical display. She was tall, athletic, with close-cropped gray hair and the posture of someone accustomed to command. Raven. She turned and Maya saw eyes that had seen too much, survived too much, carried too much. Thank you for coming. You can call me Valkyrie. It's not my name, but it will do. Maya shook her hand, noting the strength in her grip, the scars on her knuckles. You said Sparrow is alive. He is. Valkyrie gestured to the tactical display, and an image appeared on the screen. The man in the photograph was thin-bearded, his face marked by years of captivity, but the eyes were unmistakable. Green with flecks of gold, the kind of eyes that laughed even when everything was falling apart. Ryan Gallagher, Sparrow, live. Maya felt the world tilt beneath her feet. 3 years of grief, of guilt, of carrying the weight of his presumed death like a stone in her chest. And here he was staring at her from a screen, proof that sometimes the impossible was just improbable. How the word came out as a whisper. We don't know the full story yet. Best guess is he survived the initial assault in Mosul, was captured by enemy forces, and has been moved between various holding sites ever since. Valkyrie's voice was clinical, detached, the tone of someone delivering intelligence rather than salvation. What we do know is he's scheduled to be transferred to a more secure facility in 72 hours. After that, extraction becomes significantly more complicated. 72 hours. Maya studied the tactical display, her mind already calculating the approach's exits contingencies. Who else is on the team? You're looking at them. Valkyrie gestured to the 2 operators who had driven Maya to the facility. Ghost and Wraith, former operators from units that don't officially exist. They'll provide support for the infiltration. Ghost nodded, 40-something, weathered face eyes that had seen violence and made peace with it. Wraith was younger, mid-30s, with the coiled energy of someone always ready for action. 4 people for a rescue operation in hostile territory. Small team, minimal footprint, maximum deniability. Valkyrie met her eyes. This operation doesn't exist, Raven. If something goes wrong, there's no cavalry coming. No extraction. No acknowledgement that we were ever there. Maya understood. Black ops, plausible deniability, the kind of mission she'd run dozens of times before Mosul, before everything went wrong, before she'd learned that sometimes even the best operators couldn't save everyone. Why me? She asked the question that had been gnawing at her since the phone call. Why not someone on active duty? Valkyrie was quiet for a moment. Because 6 months ago, our asset managed to make brief contact with the prisoner. Sparrow gave her a message to deliver. She paused and something complicated moved across her face. He said, "Tell Raven I'm still here. Tell her the easy days are over." Maya closed her eyes, fighting back tears. The easy days are over, their old code phrase, the thing Sparrow said before every mission, a reminder that comfort was temporary and struggle was permanent. He knew we'd come for him, she whispered. He knew you'd come for him. Valkyrie corrected gently. You were his teammate, his friend. He held on to hope because he believed in you. Maya opened her eyes, and when she spoke, her voice was steady as steel. Brief me on the compound layout, guard rotations, entry and exit points. I want to know everything. Valkyrie smiled, the expression transforming her severe features into something almost warm. Welcome back, Raven. The briefing lasted 2 hours. Maya absorbed every detail with the focus of an operator preparing for combat. Guard schedules, patrol patterns, structural weaknesses, emergency protocols. By the time Valkyrie finished, Maya had memorized the compound layout as thoroughly as her own quarters back at Fort Bragg. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Insert via helicopter at a remote landing zone 12 kilometers from the target. Approach on foot under cover of darkness. Breach the compound at 0200 local time, when the guard rotation left a 90-second window of vulnerability. Extract Sparrow, exfiltrate to the pickup point before dawn. Simple, clean, 1,000 things that could go wrong. Any questions? Valkyrie asked. Maya had dozens, but only one that mattered. When do we leave? Transport departs at 1800 tonight. You'll have approximately 12 hours to rest and prepare. I don't need rest. Take it anyway. Valkyrie's voice brooked no argument. You're no good to anyone exhausted. There are quarters in the East Wing. I'll wake you at 1700. Maya wanted to argue, but she recognized the wisdom in the order. She hadn't slept in nearly 30 hours, and the mission ahead would demand everything she had. Every ounce of focus, every fraction of a second's reaction time. She found the quarters sparse and functional and lay down on the narrow bunk fully clothed. Sleep came faster than expected, pulled under by exhaustion and the strange peace of having purpose again. She dreamed of Mosul, the compound, the fire, the endless hours of holding position while her lungs slowly filled with blood. The faces of her teammates, Ghost Wraith Sparrow, others whose names she still whispered in the dark, the ones who made it out and the ones who didn't. And Sparrow, always Sparrow, falling in the smoke, disappearing into chaos, gone. Except he wasn't gone. He'd been waiting. 3 years of captivity, of torture, of holding on to hope because he believed she would come. She woke at 16:30, her internal clock more reliable than any alarm. Showered. Changed into the tactical gear that had been laid out for her. Performed the familiar ritual of checking her equipment, weapon, ammunition, medical supplies, communications gear. Each item examined, verified, secured. When she emerged from the quarters, Ghost and Wraith were waiting. They nodded in greeting, the silent acknowledgement of operators who had moved beyond the need for words. Valkyrie met them in the briefing room. Final checks complete. Transport is on the pad. Any last words? Maya looked at her team. These strangers who would trust her with their lives in the hours ahead. Whatever happens out there, whatever we face, we don't leave anyone behind. Not again, not ever. Ghost and Wraith exchanged a glance, then nodded in unison. Outstanding. Valkyrie handed Maya a satellite phone. For emergencies only. And Raven? She paused. Bring him home. That's the plan. The helicopter was a modified Black Hawk, stripped of identifying markings and equipped with noise suppression technology that made it nearly silent at altitude. As Maya climbed aboard, she felt a familiar sensation settle over her. The calm before the storm, the quiet that came when all preparation was complete and only action remained. She found a seat and strapped in as the rotors began to spin. Through the open door, she could see Fort Bragg shrinking in the distance, the base where she had hidden for 3 years, becoming smaller with each passing second. Somewhere down there, Bryn Kelly was probably starting her shift. Harlow Pierce was probably training. Everett Ashford was probably fighting his demons with the courage of a soldier who refused to surrender. And Marcus Blackwood was probably sitting in a cell, contemplating the ruins of his career. She thought of them all as the helicopter climbed into the darkening sky, the people she was leaving behind, the person she was going to save, the warrior she was becoming again. The flight took 6 hours. Maya spent most of it in silence, reviewing the mission parameters, visualizing the compound, preparing her mind for what lay ahead. Ghost and Wraith did the same, each lost in their own pre-combat rituals. When the pilot announced their approach to the landing zone, Maya felt her pulse quicken. Not from fear, but from anticipation. This was what she had been made for, what she had trained her entire adult life to do: save lives, bring people home, make the impossible possible. The helicopter touched down in a dry riverbed, the rotors kicking up clouds of dust that obscured everything beyond arm's reach. Maya was out the door before the skids fully settled, her boots hitting the ground with the familiar crunch of Middle Eastern sand. Ghost and Wraith flanked her, weapons ready, eyes scanning the darkness for threats that weren't there, but could be at any moment. Clear, Ghost reported, his voice barely audible over the helicopter's fading rotors. Move out. Maya took point, leading them away from the landing zone and into the night. 12 kilometers of hostile territory lay between them and Sparrow. 12 kilometers of uncertain ground potential, ambushes, unknown variables. She'd faced worse odds. She'd survived impossible situations. But never with this much at stake. Never with the weight of a friend's life, a teammate's hope, 3 years of guilt pressing down on every decision. They moved in tactical formation, 3 shadows flowing across the desert, like water seeking the lowest ground. No lights, no sound, just the steady rhythm of boots on sand and the slow countdown of a mission clock that allowed for no delays. Hours passed, the moon rose and set. Stars wheeled overhead in patterns Maya remembered from 100 deployments to places that didn't officially exist for missions that would never be acknowledged. And then finally they reached the compound. It was smaller than the intelligence photos had suggested, a cluster of buildings surrounded by a makeshift wall, guard towers at each corner, spotlights sweeping the perimeter in predictable patterns that spoke of complacency of guards who had been watching an empty desert for so long they'd stopped believing threats were real. "Confirmed target," Ghost whispered. Maya raised her binoculars, scanning the buildings until she found what she was looking for. A window on the second floor of the main structure, and behind the glass, barely visible in the dim light, a figure sitting motionless. Even from 200 meters away, even in near darkness, she knew him. The way he held his head, the shape of his shoulders, the unconscious habits that combat training couldn't quite erase. Sparrow confirmed. Her voice was steady, but her heart was pounding hard enough to hurt. "Execute on my mark." The guards rotated exactly as the intelligence had predicted. For 90 precious seconds, the north wall was unwatched, the spotlights sweeping elsewhere, the opportunity presenting itself like a gift from operational gods who rarely smiled on such missions. "Go, boom." They moved. The wall was 8 feet of concrete, and desperation scaled in 3 seconds with practiced efficiency. Inside the compound, they split according to the plan, Ghost and Wraith peeling off to handle the guard post 3 while Maya made for the main building. She reached the door, pulled her lockpick set from her vest. 4 seconds to defeat the mechanism, a personal record that would have made her instructors at Coronado proud if any of them knew she was here. The door swung open on silent hinges and she slipped inside. The hallway was dark, silent, smelling of dust and neglect and captivity. She moved through it like a ghost, clearing corners, checking doors, ascending the stairs to the second floor, with movements so practiced they felt like breathing. The room was at the end of the hall, simple wooden door, heavy padlock that took 6 seconds to pick instead of 4 because her hands were shaking. She pushed the door inward, and there he was, Ryan Gallagher, Sparrow. 3 years older, 30 pounds, lighter eyes that had seen too much darkness, survived too much pain. But alive, breathing, real. "Raven." His voice was a ragged whisper, disbelieving and hopeful and broken. "I knew you'd come." She crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt beside him, her hands already working on the chains that bound him to the wall. "We're getting you out of here." The first chain fell away with a metallic clatter that sounded like liberation. "Can you walk away?" "I can try. That's all I ask." The second chain released, and Sparrow slumped forward. Maya caught him supporting his weight with an arm around his waist. He was so light it frightened her, evidence of years spent with barely enough food to survive. "Ghost Wraith, package secured." She keyed her radio. "Beginning extraction." "Copy. Clear on our end. Move to exfil point." They made it down the stairs, through the hallway, out the door. The compound was quiet, the guards neutralized without casualties, the way clear for extraction. Almost too easy. Maya felt the hair on the back of her neck rise. Something was wrong. The operational gods didn't smile this broadly without demanding payment. "Move faster." She increased their pace, half carrying Sparrow toward the wall. "Something doesn't feel right." They were halfway across the compound when the lights came on. Spotlights blazed to life, turning night into day with brutal efficiency. Sirens wailed, and from every building, armed men poured into the compound like ants from a disturbed nest. 50 men, maybe more. All armed, all between them and freedom. "Contact!" Ghost's voice crackled over the radio. "Multiple hostiles, all directions. It's a trap." Maya's mind raced through options, calculating angles, assessing threats. They were outnumbered 10-1, caught in the open with a wounded man who could barely walk. "Ghost, get Sparrow to the extraction point. Call in the bird." She pulled Sparrow toward Ghost, who had materialized from the shadows. "I'll cover." "Raven, no," Sparrow started, but she cut him off. "That's an order, Captain." Their eyes met. In that moment, a lifetime of unspoken words passed between them. Trust, friendship, the understanding that sometimes one person had to hold the line so others could live. Don't die, Sparrow whispered. Not planning on it. She pushed him toward Ghost. Now go. Ghost grabbed Sparrow and started moving toward the wall. Wraith laid down suppressive fire, his weapon spitting 3-round bursts that drove the approaching enemies into cover. Maya turned toward the advancing hostiles, raised her weapon, and became the warrior she had always been. The firefight lasted 7 minutes. 7 minutes of controlled bursts and tactical retreats, of drawing fire away from her team and buying them time to reach the wall. 7 minutes of being exactly who she was, trained to be a SEAL operating in hostile territory, outgunned and outnumbered, but never outmatched. She moved like water through the compound, using cover-changing positions, making each shot count. The enemy had numbers, she had skill, and in the arithmetic of combat skill, often outweighed numbers. When the helicopter finally appeared over the compound, raining suppressive fire from its mounted guns, Maya was down to her last magazine. "Raven, move!" Ghost's voice screamed over the radio. She ran. Bullets stitched the ground behind her, throwing up geysers of sand and concrete dust. Something burned across her shoulder, a graze, nothing serious. The kind of wound you didn't think about until after the shooting stopped. She reached the wall, vaulted over with the last reserves of her strength, sprinted toward the hovering aircraft where hands reached down to pull her aboard. The helicopter banked hard, climbing into the night sky as the compound erupted in chaos below. Maya collapsed against the bulkhead, breathing hard blood seeping from a dozen minor wounds that she'd catalog later when adrenaline wasn't masking the pain. But she was alive. And beside her, strapped into a seat with Ghost monitoring his vitals, Sparrow was alive too. "You're insane." Sparrow's voice was weak but tinged with wonder. "You know that, right?" Maya laughed. The sound surprised even herself, bubbling up from somewhere deep and unguarded. "Welcome back, Sparrow. Welcome back yourself." He reached out, and she took his hand, feeling the warmth of life in his grip, the reality of resurrection. As the helicopter carried them toward safety, toward home, toward whatever came next, Maya allowed herself to feel something she had denied for 3 years. Peace. The past was behind her. The future was uncertain. But in this moment, flying through the darkness with the man she thought lost forever, she was exactly where she was meant to be. A warrior, a protector, a friend. The easy days were over. They had always been over. But maybe she thought as exhaustion finally claimed her. Maybe that was the point. Maybe the struggle itself was what gave meaning to the moments of grace. Dawn was breaking over Fort Bragg when the helicopter touched down. Medical personnel rushed to take Sparrow, their urgent voices fading as they wheeled him toward the hospital. Maya watched him go, too tired to move, too overwhelmed to process everything that had happened. Colonel Aldridge met her on the tarmac, his face a mixture of relief and something deeper. "Welcome home, Senior Chief. The doctors say Gallagher will make a full recovery, thanks to you." Maya looked across the base at the training yards, where everything had changed just 24 hours ago, at the buildings full of soldiers who now knew her secret, at the sky brightening with the promise of a new day. "Good to be home, Colonel." And for the first time in 3 years, she manned it. But home came with questions that demanded answers. 3 days later, Maya sat in a secure briefing room with Aldridge Valkyrie and a contractor named Francis Webb she had never met before. Sparrow was still in the hospital recovering, but his debriefing had provided the first pieces of a puzzle that was only now coming into focus. "The trap was too perfect," Valkyrie said, pulling up satellite imagery on the display. "They knew your insertion point. They knew your timeline. They knew your team composition." Webb, a thin man with the nervous energy of someone who spent too much time staring at computer screens, tapped his keyboard. "I've been tracking financial anomalies in the mission authorization chain. 3 days before Crimson Dawn, someone accessed the operational planning database from an unauthorized terminal." "Who?" Maya's voice was flat, but her hands were clenched under the table. "Captain Hugo Blackburn." The name fell into the room like a stone into still water. Aldridge's face went pale. Blackburn was operations officer for that sector. He had access to everything. "Everything," Webb confirmed. "And 2 weeks before Crimson Dawn, his bank account received a wire transfer of $2.3 million as from a shell company traced back to private military contractors operating in Syria." Maya stood slowly. "Where is he now?" "That's the problem," Valkyrie said. "He disappeared 18 hours ago. We think he knows we're onto him. Then we find him. Maya's voice carried the cold certainty of someone who had just been handed a target. He sold out my team. He's the reason Sparrow spent 3 years in hell. He doesn't get to walk away. Aldridge met her eyes. This is a federal matter now, Senior Chief. FBI military intelligence. With respect, Colonel, I don't care who has jurisdiction. Maya leaned forward. I'm going to find him. The only question is whether you're going to help me or get out of my way. Valkyrie smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. I was hoping you'd say that. They found Blackburn's trail 6 hours later. Webb had flagged unusual credit card activity, a rental car from a location near Fort Bragg moving west on Highway 87 toward a private airfield 40 minutes outside Fayetteville. Maya rode in the lead vehicle with Calloway, who had volunteered despite not being officially part of the operation. Behind them, 2 more vehicles carried military police and federal agents who were suddenly very interested in a decorated captain who had gone missing. He knows we're coming, Calloway said, eyes on the road. He has to know. Good, ma'am, Maya replied. I want him to know. The airfield was small, barely more than a strip of asphalt and a handful of buildings. A single-engine plane sat on the tarmac propeller, already spinning, someone moving frantically in the cockpit. That's him. Maya was out of the vehicle before it fully stopped. Wait for backup, Calloway shouted, but she was already running. Blackburn saw her coming. He burst from the plane weapon, drawn his face a mask of desperation and fear. Stay back, I'll shoot, I swear I'll... You'll what? Maya kept walking, her own weapon holstered, her hands visible and empty. Shoot a decorated seal in front of a dozen witnesses. Add murder to treason. You don't understand. Blackburn's voice cracked. They said it was just intelligence gathering. They said the mission was compromised anyway, that extracting early would save lives. 3 operators died that day. Maya stopped 10 feet away. Sparrow spent 3 years being tortured. How many lives did you save, Captain? I didn't know. The weapon shook in his hands. I didn't know they'd... You took money to sell out American soldiers. You knew exactly what you were doing. Silence fell across the airfield. Behind Maya, vehicles had arrived, doors slamming, voices shouting commands. But in this moment, it was just the 2 of them, the operator and the traitor. You have one chance to do the right thing, Maya said quietly. Surrender, face what you did, or run and prove you're the coward I think you are. Blackburn stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly the weapon lowered. He fell to his knees, sobbing. I'm sorry, God, I'm so sorry. Maya stepped forward and took the weapon from his unresisting hands. Sorry doesn't bring back the dead, but facing justice is a start. Military police moved in, cuffing Blackburn, reading him his rights. Maya watched them lead him away, feeling something loosen in her chest. Not peace, not closure, but something, accountability. 2 weeks later, Fort Bragg held a ceremony. The base chapel was full. Officers enlisted, civilian contractors, everyone who'd heard about the maintenance technician who turned out to be a hero had come to witness her formal recognition. Maya stood at attention in her dress uniform, the same uniform she'd packed away 3 years ago, the one that now felt both familiar and foreign. On the stage beside her, Sparrow stood with the help of a cane, still recovering but insisting on being present. Aldridge stepped onto the podium. Today we recognize extraordinary service under extraordinary circumstances. Senior Chief Maya Thornton is awarded the Navy Cross for her actions during Operation Crimson Dawn and her recent rescue operation. He pinned the medal to her uniform with hands that were steadier than his voice. Captain Ryan Gallagher is awarded the Silver Star for his service and his courage during 3 years of captivity. Sparrow accepted the medal with a nod, his eyes finding Maya's. They'd talked in the hospital about Mosul and what came after, about guilt and grief and the strange mathematics of survival, about how sometimes being alive was harder than being dead would have been. But they were here, both of them, against all odds. After the ceremony, Aldridge found Maya outside watching trainees run drills on the same range where this had all begun. The training position is still open, he said without preamble. Joint Special Operations Training Demand. You'd be chief instructor. Maya didn't answer immediately. She watched Harlow Pierce running an obstacle course, watched Everett Ashford calling cadence for his squad, watched all these young soldiers who thought they knew what service meant before they'd really been tested. I'll take it, she said finally. On one condition. Name it. Sparrow comes with me, co-instructor, when he's ready. Aldridge smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. 6 months later, the Callaway Tactical Training Center opened its doors. Named for the master sergeant who'd first recognized Maya for what she was funded by a DoD grant that Valkyrie had somehow managed to expedite through channels that didn't officially exist. Maya stood in front of the first class. 15 operators from different branches, Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force. 8 men, 7 women. All selected based on merit, on demonstrated capability, on the kind of determination that couldn't be taught but could be sharpened. Sparrow leaned against the wall behind her, still using the cane but getting stronger every day. Bryn managed the logistics from an office down the hall. Callaway served as liaison with base command. And in the front row, sitting at attention with an expression of fierce concentration, was Specialist Harlow Pierce. Welcome to Sentinel, Maya began. I'm Senior Chief Thornton. You're here because someone saw something in you worth developing. But let me be clear about something from the start. She looked at each of them in turn. Respect isn't given, it's earned. Not through rank or gender or background, but through action. Through the choices you make when everything is falling apart and the easy path is to give up. Every person in this program earned their place. Now you have to prove you deserve to keep it. She pulled out a challenge coin, the one Aldridge had given her, with Sparrow's name etched on the back. But now there was something new on the front, the word Sentinel, surrounded by the symbols of all 5 service branches. This represents what we're building here, not just operators, leaders, people who understand that strength without wisdom is just violence, that courage without compassion is just cruelty. Behind her, Sparrow straightened, pride evident in his eyes. My father taught me that service means sacrifice, Maya continued. Master Sergeant Callaway showed me that loyalty means never giving up. Captain Gallagher proved that brotherhood transcends time and circumstance. This is your legacy now, not as men or women, not as soldiers or sailors or airmen or Marines, as warriors. She set the coin on the podium where everyone could see it. The easy days are over. They were always over, but that's the point. The struggle is what gives meaning to the grace. Outside, the American flag snapped in the wind. Somewhere, trainees were running drills. Somewhere, new operators were learning what it meant to be extraordinary. And in this room, a small woman who had been invisible for 3 years stood before 15 people who would carry her lessons into the future. The story wasn't just beginning, it was becoming legacy.